Hey, this is Maralyn Quinones doing the history of the showboat. I decided to do more research on the history of the showboat to highlight the revolution of traveling theater and giving inspiration for theater to reach further and influence more people than traditionally allowed with brick and mortar buildings. This innovation helped bring culture and entertainment to those who may never have gotten the chance to see such performances otherwise. First, I'd like to go into the history of the steamboat, where we get our start. Steamboats played a major role in the 19th century development of the Mississippi River and its tributaries by allowing these practical, large scale transport of passengers and freight up and down the river using steam power. Riverboats were developed during the time that could navigate in shallow waters as well as upriver against stronger currents. After the development of railroads, though, passenger traffic gradually switched to the faster form of transportation. But steamboats continued to serve in the Mississippi commerce into the early 20th century. Other rivers where this became popular included the Ohio and Tennessee rivers, and large hubs included Natchez, Mississippi, Memphis, Tennessee, St. Louis, Missouri, and New Orleans. One of the first showboats, though, happened when Noah Ludlow, pictured right here, an early pioneer in traveling theater, purchased a keelboat in 1816, and he decided to name it Noah's Ark. Ludlow, along with 11 associates, they were together known as the American Theater Commonwealth Company, climbed aboard and traveled down the Ohio and Mississippi rivers, stopping wherever they could to perform for the people. They either charged a small amount of 10 cents and 5 cents along the line of bartering and trading for food or supplies that they may have needed. It's also not clear whether they ever performed on the boat or just used the boat as a means of transportation. If they did perform on the boat, though, which is probable from my research, then Ludlow's Noah's Ark would have been the first showboat in history. But it wasn't until we get to the Chapman family that we finally see the popularization of showboats. They were also called floating theaters, floating operas, or boat shows, where theaters on boats brought entertainment primarily to small towns along the inland waterways of the Midwestern and Southern United States, mainly along the Mississippi and Ohio rivers. The showboat era lasted from around 1831 up until the 1940s, with a small pause during the Civil War. Um, Definitely during the early 20th century is when they had their heyday per se. The original showboats were family owned and ventured into small, isolated river frontier locations. Family showboats were typically modest crafts of simple construction with seating between 100 and 300 people. It wasn't until later on that you had more larger showboats that weren't necessarily family owned and it was more commercialized. They did not carry passengers or transport goods, only used to transport culture and entertainment, if you would say. Eventually, the enormous floating theaters started holding up to 1,400 people, um, and the Chapman family from England launched the first showboat in 1831 in Pittsburgh. They're kind of known for starting the major movement before Ludlow, and Ludlow did say that they are an amazing family, very talented. So the Chapman boat floated along the current down the Ohio Mississippi rivers. They usually tied up for one night performances at river landings, and the 9-person Chapman family served as the entire cast and crew. Admission to the show was mostly preferred in coins, but they also accepted forms of food and other things from the farms. It kind of resembled a large garage on a flat barge. The Chapman boat was 100 feet wide and only 16 feet long, so very small. Um, I think what was really interesting about this time period, though, is they ended up performing such works as August von Kotzebue The Stranger, William Shakespeare's Hamlet and Taming of the Shrew, and the fairy tale of Cinderella. Popular songs were also frequent features on the boat, and the Chapmans were very successful in their venture, and by 1836 were able to upgrade their operation to a small steamboat. And other floating theaters soon followed the Chapman family boat on the waterways, as did circus boats and featuring animal acts, in addition to plays that became largely popular. The largest of these were circuses was the Floating Circus Palace of Gilbert R. Spalding and Charles J. Rogers, built in 1851, which actually featured a very impressive equestrian exhibition. However, in the mid 19th century, the popularity of showboats had begun to diminish, and with the Civil War, they disappeared from the crowded waterways, which in 1878, with the building of the new sensation and the use of steamer tows and the beckoning sound of calliopes increased their territory and their audiences. Early in the showboat era, though, comedies, back to nature plays, circuses, even freak shows and vaudeville acts were extremely popular. After the Civil War, though, minstrel shows, maudlin and nostalgic songs definitely prevailed over everything else. So then we kind of go into the progressive era, and the melodrama proved to be popular and successful style of showboat entertainment. And then in the early 20th century, better roads, more cars, and motion pictures provided river towns with other forms of entertainment. To complete with land entertainment in one another, the boats and shows became larger and more lavish and heavily advertised for competition. The big boats started featuring musical comedies and full-length dramas, as well as extremely extravagant costumes. The most famous boat in the era was the Grand Floating Palace, the Sunny South, and the Goldenrod, known as the Big Three. They belonged to W.R. Markle of Ohio. In the 1930s, those showboats changed their programs to more burlesque shows in order to attract a new and more sophisticated audience, less family-oriented, but ultimately higher operating costs. A disappearing riverfront and changing audience tastes brought the showboat era to an end by the early 1940s. The Goldenrod was the last known showboat to be on the water and was tied up permanently at St. Louis in 1943. From there, Jerome Kern's 1927 musical Showboat, which were made into three different types of films and revived multiple times on numerous occasions, dramatized the type of entertainment that showboats provided and depicted the lives of the showboat families and entertainers. So now we have Showboat, which is perhaps one of the most influential musicals of the 20th century, combined with the talents of Jerome Kern and Oscar Hammerstein, both of whom felt for some time the Broadway musical theater was suffering from lack of depth and needed to steer away from fluffy musical comedies and melodramatic operettas, which they were accustomed to. So Showboat opened at the Ziegfeld Theater on December 27th, 1927, and ran for 572 performances. In doing research for her proposed Showboat novel, writer Edna Ferber spent several weeks on the James Adam Floating Palace Theater in Bath, North Carolina, pictured right there, gathering material about the disappearing American entertainment venue, the River Showboat. So when it comes to musical theater, we all kind of know the history of the showboat and of showboats. It follows a family and their life on the showboat and kind of what happens when the daughter left and decided to go after this man that she fell in love with, which led to a very tumultuous relationship. But overall, showboats helped revolutionize how we see traveling theater today. leading to greater productions in even more imaginative places with increasing production value. Thank you.